In today's video, I want to have a look at the Weiss mastering suite from Softube and we'll compare its price point and its functionality to some other tools that I would normally use and decide if it's worth the Weiss. So very simply, I've used the 10-day demo. There's no sponsor from Softube or anything like that. And I've mastered a track that I already had pretty much where I wanted it to be. And I've not tried to copy it. I've tried to let it lead me down the path. And what I found kind of surprising. Let's jump into the session and see. What I've done here is just copied a track and then mastered it. And I've got a comparison right next to it of the version I had that I was pretty solid and happy with. What I've got up here is the LUFS meter and basically the loudness, just so I can quickly show you and you can have a quick listen to the A and B of the two and see that they're roughly in the same ballpark of loudness. So we got a pretty good fair comparison. So here we go. We're going to work over this little loop of the track and I'm just going to jump between the two and we can hear where we're at with each. You can see there, integrated wise, that they're close, but they're not exact for sure. However, when we jump between the two, there's not this massive difference in loudness. And we can see with our momentary and short that they're actually not far apart at all. In most cases, less than half a dB in terms of that short LUFS measurement. Now that's important because when we jump between the two and we compare, we don't want a sudden jump in loudness, so we can have a relatively fair comparison. And that's such a small difference, it's barely discernible, or I would argue not discernible at those kind of levels anyway. So it seems to be a pretty fair comparison. I just wanted to start off with that I'm not, slamming one and I've really backed off the other kind of thing. Okay, so in the Weiss mastering suite, we get a whole set of tools. Now, it looks like I've used a similar amount of tools. Now, this is one thing that I found. I got to the end of my master using just the Weiss tools, not been limited over here. I've used a whole bunch of different things. I got to the end of the master using the Weiss tools with just these 5 tools. Now, on my other one, I've got de-edger disabled. I didn't use it in the end, but in Ozone 11 alone here, I've got like 6-7 plugins running. And then I've got the iron compressor. And then I've got another version of Ozone running purely focused on the drums to try and lift the drums up a bit. And then I've got the loudness options running and I've got the vintage limiter pushing into the maximizer for that 2 steps of loudness. I got there a lot quicker and a lot easier using the Weiss stuff, which was interesting to me. Now I've not used every tool, but I do want to go through the chain that I've used here. So first off, I've used the EQ one and I've dialed this in by ear like I did before. And what was super interesting to me about that was the EQ curve I've come up with is very, very similar. So I'm hearing a similar thing. I'm finding a similar kind of ranges and places to duck things away. And I lifted up the same part, which kind of tells you EQ wise, it's doing the same thing. It's just got a different interface and a different way of looking at it. We'll just compare them. Today's video is sponsored by DistroKid. They let me get my music out to all of the major distributors, and they do that at a price an independent artist can easily afford. If you're ready to get your music or beats out there and want to release an unlimited amount of music each year, check the link in the description below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution with DistroKid. If we open up Ozone, the very second thing I've got in here, because I've got master rebalance first, which is giving 1 dB back to the vocal. Obviously can't do that with the Weiss, that's some voodoo magic. If we look at the curve, it's actually not far off being the same. I've lifted the highs a lot more in this EQ1. I did my roll off here. That is actually later on in Ozone. I rolled it off later after the impact compressor, but I've just done it all in the 1 EQ here. And yeah, they're very similar, similar kind of range. Like if we look at the dip that I made here, I did it at 5/6 60 in Ozone, and the dip in here, I'm not as familiar with this one. Okay, yeah, so I've dipped lower down on here at 415. I've maybe pulled it a little bit further. Let's have a look. Minus 1.2, and over here is minus 1. In terms of the boost, like it's just a really similar curve, which is kind of interesting, but push the highs a lot more. This EQ is interesting. There's two EQs that come with the Weiss set, but to be honest, they're basically the same thing. We've got the same EQ algorithm, but with a different interface. And this is the same algorithm as the EQ1. As far as I can tell, it's just got a more limited option set and feature set, which makes it a cheaper version of the same algorithm. Either way, I opted for the EQ1 in this instance. After that, I've gone with the compressor, and it's barely doing any compression here. Actually pulling it down a couple of dB. And evening out that left and right a little bit for me. So like here, if we look at our meter, there would be -3. So it's like a decibel of compression, just to squeeze it in a little bit. And that worked nicely for me. And again, if we look at Ozone, I've got this going on in impact. Obviously it's multi-band in here. And as well, I've used the SPL iron. I'm squeezing this a little bit harder to about 2 dB, but yeah, it's about the same kind of average. And it's giving me the same kind of vibe. But like I said, what's interesting is, I've done all of what's going on in here with just an EQ. Now I would maybe like to touch the imaging a little bit. And if you listen to the top end, there is a big difference between the two. Yeah, the Weiss is a lot more focused and central. Now, I've managed to make the drums a lot more aggressive in the Ozone one, but it's not that they're bad. So as a tool set so far, it's kind of impressed me. The compressor, super transparent. I know it's only a small amount, but it's just holding everything in. The EQ's just done a wicked job, especially allowing me to really pump the high ends a lot more without becoming harsh. Whereas again, in the Ozone version, what I ended up doing, I pushed it up a fair bit, but later on, I've got the dynamic EQ actually pulling some of the highs back out when they get too much. I don't feel that I need to do that with this. Don't know why that is, some kind of voodoo magic going on. Now what I did do, I used both of the DS's after this. So I've got this working just here. Monitor. It's focused around this quite harsh range here. Now I've got this really low in these headphones right now, but for you, this level will be the same. This might be quite a harsh tone to listen to. I'm sorry, but it'll illustrate my point of why I've narrowed down on that. And so this is on tiny frequency amount here. I'm dialed in at 5.2K, which I found pretty harsh. It's not a particularly nice tone in some parts of the track, but it needs to be there. So I've just dialed it back using this compressor when it gets too harsh, which again, I did in here as well. And it turns out, I think it was, I did it a lot more subtly here. 5,700, what were you on here? 5,200. So I found slightly different areas, but again, this is a lot more subtle. Like, we're only catching it every now and then with like half a dB, a little bit more than that reduction. And in here, as much as 1.3, but it's probably only touching about half a dB, but around the same frequency. You can't control the Q on here, but it's doing its job. Right, we're going back to normal. And then I used this de-esser, which gives me 2 regions to focus on. And we can hear that that's generally a bit, isn't it? And that's being controlled, and so is up here. You can hear like the click of the hats and whatnot. So we're taking those out a good chunk as well. Now you might think that's really stupid and really subtle in both cases, right? But listen to the difference when we take them away. It's so much more listenable now that we've found those harsher areas and just dialed them back a touch. And the very last thing is just this master limiter, which was the easiest thing in the world to set up. I've done it on DS again, which is again controlling some of those highs. Pushed it all the way up 9.5 dB, absolutely slamming it, and I was done. That was it. So those 5 tools doing those things got me so much closer. I like this master where I've used Ozone and Iron and I get way more aggressive drums. I like the spread in the top end, but the focus and clarity of this is also very good. And considering they're tools I've never used before. So do I think it's worth the price overall? Well, I think it's a very expensive suite. However, the tools are impeccably good. EQ1 has very, very much impressed me with, especially that I could lift that high end up so much more without it becoming like harsh and distorted. And I honestly, genuinely don't fully understand why that is. If it's something to do with the curvature, if it just is unable to not, I just don't know how they've done that. Because most EQs, you're gonna sweep that right up, get all that extra air, and it's gonna become too harsh, which we could see happen with Ozone. I had to dial it back. Now, for what you get for the money, you get a fantastic EQ, you get an awesome compressor. The de-esser tools are useful, although granted, I think the ability to use the dynamic EQ or perhaps any other de-esser, arguably, you can get similar results dialing it in and being very careful with it. You can achieve those. The fact that with, say, the Fab Filter Suite or the Ozone Suite, you've got the ability to multi-band compress or dynamic EQ those areas down, it's kind of negligible there. The EQ is the real selling point for me, and as well as the limiter. The limiter is fan-fucking-tastic. The fact that I could just crank that up, like put it in, choose the kind of profile that sounded best, crank it up, and it doesn't distort. It does what it says on the tin. The de-essing version on that is excellent. It saved so much work, and you see all the extra processing steps I did with that Ozone master. I put DS on that and cranked it, and it did most of that work for me. So would I say it is worth it as an overall suite? It's too expensive for what it is. Like, the price sucks. I don't go and pay €1,000 for these tools. If it was on sale and was comparable to Ozone 11, yes, you get a lot less tools, but you get some amazing tools in there. I would potentially look at buying just the limiter and the EQ separately at some point if you don't have that kind of functionality. Otherwise, the Fab Filter Suite, when they do a sale, goes down to like 300, 399 kind of range. Ozone perpetually somewhere is pretty much always on sale. And the tools you get in those are impeccably good as well. The extra additional things you can do are why I still prefer my Ozone master, although the Weiss one is amazing, like an amalgamation of those tools together. And I am looking at something very, very interesting. I could see myself taking away the maximizer from Ozone, keeping all that extra enhancement of the drums, keeping those harsher tones controlled with the dynamic EQ, etc. And then using the maximizer from the Weiss set and just being able to push that a little bit further and get a little bit more clarity in that sound. The other thing is like imaging and spreading. Yes, you've got the ability to go mid-side with the EQs, but that's limited in terms of you can't isolate a band and push it out, and then isolate a band and distort that band and create that kind of spread that you can with the likes of Ozone. Equally, that doesn't exist with the fab filter options as well, but you've got other ways of controlling, and you've got Pro Q again, which allows you to take in all those de-essing requirements and all that harshness and narrow all that down too. Amazing tools. EQ, really impressive. Limiter maximizer, I wouldn't say I've heard anything as good as that ever. That's probably going to be a buy for me just on its own, but the suite, too expensive overall. I hope that's been helpful. That is my genuine unbiased review. I say unbiased, I do love Ozone, but it just doesn't quite compete, but it has some tools in it that are just next to none.